All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to our next session around managing the human aspects of change management in the context of how we optimize the teams that we're working with, and also our business process management, our BPM programs in that context. And so today we're going to continue on in our discussion around change and change management, which is such an integral and important aspect of developing a continuous improvement culture, and also designing and putting into place a strong and sustainable BPM process or program. And so as you're thinking about your role as a BPM professional, process management professional, process improvement professional, or even a human resources professional from that aspect, that's the angle that we're looking at this component of change and change management. Really, how do we bring our organizations around to creating a new culture that is geared around continuous improvement? And so my name is Diana Willis. I'm the founder and CEO of the Pendolino Group. We are a strategic partner of Nintex ProMap and also providers of human resources services, scalable human resources services, and business process optimization services to many of our clients. This is part of a regular series and part of one of our certification courses that is around human aspects of change and change management. Leading up to today, some of the areas that we've already looked at include addressing the human side of change and really addressing that from a systematic standpoint, very methodically going through and how do we get an organization aligned, ready for change, and actually accelerate through the change curve. So we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the change model, different change models, and the stages of change that organizations and individuals go through. And so it's always important that we're keeping in mind whenever we're talking about change and change management, that we really are talking about change at the individual level. Then brought together, we're looking at team change and evolution and the culture change that is the underpinning of all successful and sustainable changes. As we're diving in deeper now into these aspects, we're stepping into session 8, and this is around the aspect of addressing culture explicitly. Often the topic of culture is put into one of those categories of it's a quote unquote a soft issue. It is harder to get our hands around, harder to measure. We talked a little bit in our last session about assessing the cultural landscape, a couple of tools and methodologies for doing that, and really being able to determine where are we as a culture, what's important to us as a culture, how do we assess where we are, and continue to assess, obviously, through the evolution of change. Now, we're going to talk about the importance of addressing culture explicitly. Often, what happens in change management programs is that we focus again on some of the things that are more quantitative in nature. So we'll focus around the program, for example, the communication mechanism, have we delivered the message? But aspects that we often avoid or just don't deal with explicitly have to do with the culture itself. And so that's what we're going to dive into today, is the culture itself. What is culture? And how do we really drill in and actively and explicitly address culture? So our areas of focus during today's webinar, and for those of you who are new and joining our methodology here, this is a snap webinar. We do these in 20 to 30 minutes is what we aim for. And so we want to really give you some good content that you can then take away and start putting into action in your organization as well, or really think about your program. So as we're zeroing in today around addressing culture explicitly, the things that we want to be thinking about is that, the cultural aspects of change are most overlooked. And especially when we're planning for or managing a change initiative. So again, with change and change management, when we approach it systematically, when we approach change and change management itself as a project, if you will, it is easy to overlook the element of culture, because culture is, as I said, often considered a soft aspect. Often it's a taboo topic in many companies, and it can be hard to get your arms around, but you want to make sure that in your change management program, your methodology that you have explicitly called culture out. And I'm going to give you some ways to do that, some ways to speak about it, okay? Because if you can drive change at the cultural level, you will absolutely be able to accelerate change in your organization, all right? So it's important that we understand that. So our leaders need to be explicit about the culture and the underlying, the desired behaviors that are related to that desired culture, all right? So we want to be really explicit about that. We also want to recognize that culture is an amalgam of history, values and beliefs, attitudes, behaviors. It's all of those things combined in there that actually end up defining culture, right? And so when you start seeing it in the behaviors are in many respects the very last evidence point of what is the true culture. And so we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper as well. Now, also recognize that change programs themselves done really well. You know, when we study successful companies, those who respond to changes in the market very readily, those companies who have embodied continuous improvement in their processes and in their process programs and their methodologies, and they've really embodied it. What we find is that the change programs that they have and that they put into place involve creating and combining cultures or even reinforcing aspects of the current culture that is representative of what the desired end state is. Okay, so we're going to keep all of this in mind and recognizing that every company has some kind of cultural center. It's like the locus of thought, activity, and influence, when that all comes together and even can include personal identification. Let's dive into these. So addressing culture explicitly. When I talk about leaders needing to be explicit about the culture and the desired underlying behaviors, what we're really going after here is that the evidence shows us, all of the research shows us that true culture change, you want to create a culture of continuous improvement, that true culture change starts with changing behavior. Now, like I said, you know, behavior is the evidence of, the outward evidence of what a culture embodies or what a culture encourages. And so to really start shifting the culture, we need to start at that end state. And when we think about changing behavior, what we're going after is these principles that state that culture dictates a competitive advantage. These are the ways that we act, that we respond out in the market. You may recall in one of our earlier sessions, we were talking a little bit about how the way that your team shows up to its clients is representative of the underlying culture. And so it is fact that culture drives behavior, behavior then dictates competitive advantage. There's a direct line here. And there's plenty of research you can dive into that will show you more and more of those evidence points as well. So with that, keeping in mind culture change really starts with changing the behavior. There is a growing recognition of this fact among many business leaders. A strong culture is going to drive competitive advantage. We're seeing more and more of this also coming out in with many publicly traded organizations, for example, certainly in the nonprofit space as well, and government agencies, more recognition of this fact. Strong cultures are going to drive competitive advantage. And leadership, business leaders, organization leaders, they get it. Most of them really get it intuitively. The majority of them get it intellectually as well, and there's a growing body of evidence around this aspect. So arm yourself with that kind of data to open up this conversation around culture. And again, remembering that culture can sometimes, it can feel elusive. How do we start shifting culture? And that's what we're addressing here. So where you can lead with some data, some pieces that really start to demonstrate this tight link between culture and competitive advantage, there is an advantage or a strong leverage point there for you, okay? The truth is that culture is one of the very few sustainable competitive advantages. When you really think about that one. So let's peel this back a bit. If you are espousing that you are an organization that believes in and embodies continuous improvement, the degree to which your culture, represented by the behaviors, the attitudes, the actual results, the degree to which your behaviors align to what you're espousing around continuous improvement, no other company can repeat that. No other company can copy that. That is something that is truly unique to your organization. So that helps make the case for why it's so important to call out culture explicitly in your change management program. It is one of the very few truly sustainable competitive advantages. It cannot be replicated by other organizations. Unlike products, for example, can be replicated. Processes can even be replicated. But the way things are done, the way the organization behaves, that cannot be replicated. That makes a very, very powerful case, because the companies that win, they're winning not because of what they're doing, but how they're doing it. Okay? That's how they do it, and how they do it is determined by their culture. Okay? So what is culture? Let's dig a little bit into this now and take a look and get our arms around truly what is culture, and then we'll look at how do we start to shape it. What are some of the things, tools and tips you can take away here and start to put into action or start the conversation in your organization. So as we said, company culture is this amalgam of shared history, explicit values and beliefs, and common attitudes and behaviors. Okay? That's a general definition, if you will, around culture. And it's a combination of all of these things: the history of the organization, how you leverage that history, the stated or explicit values and beliefs. What's our mission statement? What's our vision statement? Those types of things. What are our core values that we espouse to? And then, of course, the attitudes and behaviors, what actually shows up in the organization. So to think about it as a snapshot of culture. So organization culture is really this integrated sum total of both formal and informal behaviors, learned and shared assumptions, values and beliefs. All right. It's really this integrated sum total of all of these things, both formal and informal. One key is that we will all agree is that it's that sum total which governs how people behave in organizations, right? So culture is that underlying component. It's the sum total of all these formal and informal components, all right? Here's an important aspect that I want you to take away and really kind of think about this as you reflect on your organization, all right? So culture is habitually implied, right? It's not expressly defined, okay? So it's habitually implied. And as a result of it being implied, we would think that there would be some looseness to that, right? That there could be some randomness in terms of when it shows up or doesn't show up, given that it's not expressly defined and called out, okay? Yet what's really important is that it has a profound influence on the people in the organization, and it shapes how they go about their business, how they do their work, all right? I'll give you an example. This is a DMV example. It's a Department of Motor Vehicles example. A number of years ago, I was waiting in line. I was there for a while. I was waiting in line to get my driver's license renewed. And I was just observing the space. And if you could picture, it's a big open office area, a lot of cubicles around there, service desks circulating. You can pretty much see everybody that was working there at the DMV. You could see them all in their workspaces. And everyone seemed to be moving at a pretty even pace. All right, not too fast, not too slow, just an even, steady pace that came about. And what was fascinating to me was somebody came out of one of the back offices and they came into the space and they had a lot of energy and they were really like excited and they were moving around quickly, and that's how they came out of the office into this open shared space. And I watched them for just a moment, and within a minute, their pace had also slowed. And they started moving at the same similar pace as the others that were there in the space. That's the power of this habitual implication. And so you want to be watching for that. How do people, when they come into the environment or when they're working on your business processes, when they're doing these aspects of work, how do they actually shape or shift or adjust the way that they're working in the environment, the words that they use, the cadence of their conversations, the cadence of the work that they're doing? Watch yourself as well, because we are our own good barometers around this. Okay, so this is how you can kind of get a snapshot of culture for your organization, is through observation that way. Okay, now let's talk about some of the key elements of changing culture. So with that being our foundation, now what we want to consider is how do we go about changing that, given that it's implied and it's habitually implied? How do we actually make change? So the change programs that are around culture, and again, this is in the space of whether it's broad, large-scale culture, it's culture related to continuous improvement, process improvement, really shifting the way that people are thinking about their work, the way that they're doing their work. Change programs can involve creating new cultures, combining cultures, or even reinforcing cultures, reinforcing aspects of the existing culture that you want to carry forward. So you want to be thoughtful about that, all right? We really want to be thoughtful. An analogy that I think is great is if we think about culture as the software that drives how an organization operates, we can start to get our arms around this. There are certain algorithms that are in place. There are certain activities that take place, a particular way. Programs and the design of programs will absolutely drive behavior. Processes will drive behavior. As we just think about, I was working with a team not too long ago who in their payroll environment, they had a time card system that was completely independent from their payroll system. And so the way that their payroll process worked was that the hourly employees, they would punch the time clock, it would all go into one system. And then the payroll person created a completely different or new schedule for the managers as to when they needed to approve time cards. So they created time cards, they did the approvals according to that schedule. But here was the interesting thing. Because of the process, because there was no data flow, automated data flow, or anything like that in the place, and there was quite a bit of manual intervention that was happening. Because of that process, it allowed for a time schedule that allowed the manager to approve the time clock or to approve the time cards every 2 weeks, even though the actual pay schedule for the company was 1st of the month to the 15th and then 16th of the month to the end of the month, right? Pretty standard payroll schedule. Well, all of that context and the process that was in there drove behaviors that created a tremendous amount of manual work in between the time card system and the payroll system, and reconciliation of data and manual input twice of the time that people had been working. A lot of things that you would look at as a process professional or an HR professional even, and kind of ask, well, why did they do that? So the process was driving that kind of behavior. And also then, as we started peeling it back, looking at where could we get some good data flow that was happening, some opportunities to integrate systems, get them talking to each other. So now we've got that, and we're starting to drive a completely different set of behavior. So if we think about culture now, let's go back to culture as the software that drives how an organization operates. It works very similar to that. So as we look at the culture, that's going to drive how the organization operates, right? Which means that it's kind of the billions of zeros and ones that comprise that code, right? And it's going to define what the business's basic personality is. Are we a service-oriented organization? How far do we go to ensure that our clients are well taken care of? At what point do we draw the line? What do we do to ensure that we are following processes? Are there spots where we allow individuals to go outside of processes to accelerate work? Those types of things, okay? So really, when we think about it that way, we can start to recognize that there are certain levers, things that you can adjust, just as you can rewrite code in software, where you can start to shift and get culture to operate both on a conscious level and an unconscious level. right? So thinking about it, using that software analogy, I think is really helpful as you reflect on your culture as well and your change program. Okay, so remembering that in our change program and any change initiative, we want to call out culture explicitly, and we want to get clear on our definition of culture, that we have habitual implied behaviors that take place and are absolutely driven by some of these algorithms that are in play. And if we now step back and think about culture as the software that drives how the organization operates, we can start impacting or affecting at that software level, so to speak. Okay? So we always want to remember that culture is also very dynamic and fluid. It's never static. All right? It's going to keep evolving. And that's good. All right. It's going to keep learning, right? The culture and that kind of underpinning, if you will, continues to evolve. It continues to adapt, all right, and is driving behaviors. As people are starting to learn what are the new behaviors, what's going to be rewarded, for example, what's going to be recognized, what's important to us, what do we feel best about, all right? And of course, as we talked a little bit earlier, that culture really can't be copied or easily pinned down, all right? That is the underpinning, if you will, of the competitive advantage. So just driving that home again, okay? So to recap on this piece, there can culture is constantly self-renewing and it's slowly evolving, all right? So from that standpoint, then it helps for us to understand what are the key factors so that now we can bring in some very specific actions that can be taken to help drive change at the culture level, which ultimately is where you're going to really, really engage the organization and get that shift that you're looking for. All right. So first, the culture factors. So as I mentioned, right, each company, there's this cultural center, right? It's that kind of that locus of thought and activity, or that personal identification around things. And there's an interesting piece of research that was done by Edgar Schein. And he spoke to three really highly interconnected factors that are the primary drivers of any organization's culture. And so understanding these three factors now serves as a basis for determining what types of actions or interventions you can bring into place into your change management program that will explicitly drive at culture. Okay, so these artifacts, the first element of the first factor are artifacts, right? So artifacts are the things that kind of give you the first impression of an organization's culture. These are going to be things like the office setup, for example, the way documents get laid out, the types of tools that are used, the way decisions get made, for example. So these are kind of the artifacts. They happen as a result of the culture being in place, okay? Now, you're also going to get the second component. So certainly things like words that espouse the values and the beliefs, the mission statement, right? The vision statement, our core values, all right? So the types of words that are used to espouse these core elements, okay? And those are also important in providing that formal benchmark, if you will, for whatever that stated culture is. So we've got our artifacts. As we understand those, they serve to reinforce an existing culture. We have the words that are articulating what that expectation is or that desired, and that element comes into play. And then finally, the third element, and probably more important, these are some of those deep-seated visible behaviors that are widely shared in practice day in and day out. So these are going to be some of those habitual behaviors that I talked about earlier in my example. So those three elements of the artifacts, the espoused values, and the basic underlying assumptions, right? Those three core elements really serve to define and lock in your culture. Now, all of us are change management professionals. Again, we're building a continuous improvement culture around our BPM and our process management. If we are a human resources professional, we are all change management professionals, which means that we can use this structure, these 3 factors, to assess where are we currently, what are some of the current artifacts, what do they tell us about our culture, okay, the symbols, the structures, the business processes, the rituals that we have. What are some of the espoused values? So what's our formal statement around our mission, our goals, our strategies, right, our core values? And third, what are those basic underlying assumptions? What are the beliefs and the values that we have, the underwritten but widely known behaviors, all right, those things that we see happening, okay? And with that in mind, we can assess where's our organization today and where do we want to take the organization, right? So considering these 3 things, now let's get into real quick here, what are some of the actions you can take, all right? So changing behaviors is one of the most powerful determinants of real culture change. We talked about that earlier, okay? When we can start shifting behavior, then we can actually start shifting the culture, and we can make it happen pretty quickly. So what people do matters more than what they've said, right? You've probably heard this stated a number of different ways. Your words, your actions speak louder than your words, okay? Who you are being makes it difficult for me to hear what you are saying. You've heard this said a number of different ways, okay? So we want to leverage that, and we want to focus around behavior change, okay? So to obtain more positive influences in the organization, in the culture situation, to shift people to a continuous improvement environment, to shift people to adopting a philosophy around continuous improvement and contribution, right? Process management, really engaging around it, okay? It is better to focus on changing the behavior and changing the right behaviors. So that's where we're going to drive to real culture change, okay? Because when we make direct appeals to beliefs, values, or I'll say, ways of doing things, it rarely gets traction, okay? It can often become a debate around what's the right word to use. Are we continuous improvement or are we process improvement? It was just, we've all been down that path, right? But if we can shift behavior, then the mindset follows, all right? So I love this little quote by Benjamin Franklin: well done is better than well said. All right. So we want to focus on shifting the behaviors that are going to change or allow the change in mindset to follow. So what does that look like? So there are a number of ways we can do this. And as you're looking at these, just kind of think about who are the individuals in your organization that you need to get bought in to having this explicit conversation around culture as an aspect of your change management program. And who are the individuals that you need to get bought in to even test some of these different approaches inside of your organization, your pilot groups, for example, to really demonstrate how you can shift very quickly, how you can shift culture. So first off is hiring new people that fit the new culture. I call this hiring ahead of the curve. When you have opportunities to hire people, to backfill positions, think about your desired state and hire to that, all right? We want to accelerate hiring that fit into the new culture. Also, of course, giving recognition to people who demonstrate the new culture tools, the new culture methods, the new way of being, all right? So we want to be really visible with that kind of recognition, right? And other people will start to take notice to it. Many organizations go down this path where they provide monetary incentives for people who demonstrate that new culture. So for example, if you choose a pilot group and you're going to be implementing or rolling out ProMap, for example, is your new BPM, and part of your new culture is leveraging that tool set as your database, your knowledge, your record of truth, all right? Then we want to reinforce that behavior, all right? So you can set up some creative ways then to give recognition around the utilization of the tool, give recognition of monetary or non-monetary incentives for people, and be visible with it. Okay, you really need to get comfortable with being visible around that recognition and those types of incentives. Role modeling. So role modeling by the managers. We talked in one of our earlier sessions about the importance of pulling in our leadership and our management and cascading through that way. All right. Also being willing to dismiss those who are digging in to maintain status quo. This is not always an easy conversation, but at some point, my grandfather taught me how to fish, and he loved that saying, right? At some point, you either, fish or cut bait, right? You got to choose a path. And, there will be some people who won't shift to the new culture. And some of these can be difficult conversations. A lot of this has to do with us as change management professionals, building our relationships with the senior leadership, as we talked about in a prior session as well. Okay. And then also promoting those opinion leaders who do demonstrate the new culture, the desired behavior. They become the new leadership. Okay. So these are some of the things that you can concentrate on. And when you step into this, these explicitly drive at culture, which is an absolutely core and critical element. All right. So with that, I know we are just at our time right now. So what I'd like to do is, if you have any questions at all, any observations, please drop them into the chat section. I will be sure to respond back to everybody to let you know any questions that we had, any additional insights that we wanted to share. Let me give you some insight into what next week is, and then my contact information as well, so you can reach out directly to me at any time. Our next topic is around preparing for the unexpected, because let's just admit it, it happens. Right? We've got a great plan. We want to be thinking about plan B, plan C, and even sometimes plan D. All right. And so with that, our plan for the unexpected, as well as planning for how people may react in the event of an unexpected distraction, if you will. Okay. Business changes, new market shift, priorities shift. How do we plan for those things so that we can really sustain change, not get derailed on all of it? Okay. In addition to that, please do reach out to me if you've got any questions in the meantime. I really look forward to supporting you. You can email me, info@pendolinogroup.com. You can also email me directly, diana@pendolinogroup.com. Would love to provide whatever support you need for your team, for your change management initiative, for your business processes, and even for your human resources team as well. You can also schedule some free time with me if you'd like. Here's my contact for actually scheduling right onto my calendar. Go for it. I'm here to help provide whatever service is possible. I look forward to connecting up with you. Next week, we will be taking the week off for the holiday. I think we're actually having 2 weeks off, and then we're going to be gearing back up again. So just keep an eye on that. I'll send out some notifications as well, so you know when we're back on. I look forward to it. Have a wonderful, wonderful remainder of the week, and I look forward to talking to you very soon. Thanks so much, and have a great day.